couple of things that if you knew around here, we do a tier list every season, ranking each position, top 10 guys in each position based on last, I'm gonna say regular season with an asterisk. Typically, it's always about the regular season, unless the guy has a crazy standout performance in the playoffs. That playoff performance might weigh some of my ranking. You call it hypocritical, say it's not fair. It's my list. I'm sorry. The prime example of that is Jamal Murray last week. He ended up over a couple of other guys. He had a good regular season, don't get me wrong, but he stepped up so much and was so phenomenal in the playoffs. I had to give him a little nod, had him show him some love. And that's just an example. You're going to see something similar. You might see something similar in this list, but without further ado, let me put my notes up over here on this side. So we got 12 guys on the board. These was the 12 I think were worthy of the conversation. That means obviously I have 2 honorable mentions. Very similar to last week when we did with the point guards. When it comes to like 8 through 12, or maybe in this case more like 9 through 12, if you one of the guys that have 11 or 12 in the honorable mention spot, y'all might have them 8, 9, 10. I'm not tripping over that. And then shoot, even when we get to 1, 2, 3, even 4 to an extent, that top 4, I think you can make some real swaps and move some people around. I'll get into that in a little bit. Oddly enough, the guys I think are the most solidified in this list, and at least for me in terms of where I placed them, were like 5 through 7. Like they were there. They were right solidly there for me. But the lower half and upper half of this list, I think, was a little interchangeable for me. So we'll save some of the honorable mentions. I'll go over the honorable mentions after I do number 9 and 10. That sound good? Let me relook at my list, make sure I got this stuff in the right order. It wasn't, like I said, the bottom half was pretty bad, pretty difficult in terms of like solidifying where I wanted people to be. But at number 10, eking into the list is where I have Tyrese Maxey. I think Tyrese Maxey had a really, really good season. I think, let's get negative. I think let me look like I'm buffering on my end. Let me just make sure I'm good. All right, bet. I think Tyrese Maxey had a really good season. I think some of the things that he excelled in was shooting. He was a great shooter this season. He had 10 attempts. On 6 attempts a game, he shot 43% from 3. He was excellent in transition, good at attacking the basket. I think this particular piece, you're going to hear me say for a couple of different guys, and I think that's what makes the guys at the top so elite. I wish he had a better mid-range game. And that's going to apply to a lot of these guys. A lot of these guys can shoot the 3 and get to the basket, but I think what separates the separator from the top 3, top 2 guys is that mid-range game. Tyrese Maxey was, I don't want to say surprisingly a good defender, but he was a solid defender this season. He had to guard a lot of the point guard position with the Sixers this year, playing alongside James Harden. I think he had a really solid year, so I'm gonna have him at 10 for me. At 9 is where I have Bradley Beal. Now I went back and forth on, I'm like, where's Bradley Beal face at? I went back and forth on actually having Bradley Beal on this list at all, if I'm going to keep it a bean with you. Bradley Beal, I think, went a little under the radar in a lot of people's books. He only played 50 games this season. He didn't have the explosive season he had like 2 years ago where he scored 31, where he averaged 31. But in my mind, he still had a really, really good year. He's one of the best in this list at attacking the basket. I think his ability to drive and slash and get to the rim is low-key underrated. That's part of the reason why I think the Suns went after him. Still a solid shooter, a little undersized-ish for the 2-guard position in my mind, but I like his game. I like Bradley's game. He's not the best defender, but he's decent. He's solid. He can shoot the ball. He can score. I think he had a good season, 50 games this year. And now we'll get into my honorable mentions because, like I said, I got Bradley and Maxey here, but I'm not married to the idea of them being at the 9 and 10 spot. I'm going to keep it a bean with y'all. My 2 honorable mentions before we go on to 7 and 8 were Desmond Bane and Tyler Hero. They didn't make my list for a couple of reasons. Desmond Bane, great shooter, held down the fort when John Morant wasn't there. Honestly, I don't really have anything negative to say about him. I just don't think he's better than 8 and up on this list. I don't really have anything negative to say about Desmond Bane. I think he had a phenomenal season, really good shooter. Even with the short arms, I think he's a low-key underrated defender, not necessarily like a passing lane guy or a deflections guy, but I think he just does a good job of staying in front of his man. May not always get up the best contest simply because of the height and the arms and the wingspan, but he does a good job of staying in front of his man and moving his feet. He's really solid defensively, and he did a really good job of holding down the fort for the Memphis Grizzlies when John Morant was out this season. Tyler Hero is an honorable mention because as great as he is offensively, as good as he is offensively, I think his offensive game is, call me blasphemous, very comparable to Tyrese Maxey's. And I think Tyrese Maxey is a slightly better defender. I don't think either of them are like phenomenal defenders, but I would go as far as to say that Tyler Hero is a bad defender. I think the Miami Heat just have enough good defenders around him. Eric Spoelstra is a really, really, really good head coach that knows how to hide him and move him around on defense and get him on the least impactful offensive player. And if there happens to be a moment where Tyler Hero does, get beat on a mismatch or is finds himself in a mismatch or being attacked by the primary ball handler, you have one of the best rim protectors in Bam behind you. You got Jimmy Butler to probably either a lefty or right. There's just other defenders, and the way the Miami Heat play defense really helps hide some of, I don't want to say his flaws, but it's hide some of his shortcomings on the defensive end of the ball. So shout out to Tyler Hero, shout out to Desmond Bane. Once again, no disrespect to either of them dudes. I think they're phenomenal. They just didn't make my list. But if they made your list, you already know I'm not tripping. It's spinning, but it say excellent. It's spinning, but it say excellent. So we're going to keep it moving. All right, moving on to number 8. What do I have at number 8? Who do I have at number 8? At number 8 is where I have DeJounte Murray. So for me, if you watch it, if you was rocking with us all season or even last season, y'all knew going into the season, I wasn't against it, but I was iffy on the whole DeJounte Murray trade. I wasn't sure how a backcourt of what was essentially 2 point guards at one point was going to mesh being together. Mainly because not so much that we haven't seen 2 point guards, one of them assuming the role as a shooting guard or assume the role of 2 combo guards playing off of each other. We've seen that throughout the league, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. The reason I was hesitant on the DeJounte Murray situation was because he's not a great floor spacer. He's not a great catch and shoot guy. So I was worried of how well him and Trey would be able to play together, because when Trey has the ball, in theory at the time, I was like, it's not like DeJounte Murray's about to be spotting up, catch and shoot, ready for a pass. But I will say his shot did improve. That was one thing I was really happy to see from him. It's not amazing still. He was only like 34%, but that's league average. He got to be a league average shooter, which I think was really solid for the Hawks. But defensively, he was great. He did what they wanted him to do on the defensive end of the ball. He took on the main primary ball handler assignment night after night after night and did a really good job at it. The next step, I think, for DeJounte Murray when it comes to just being an Atlanta Hawk is, one, getting, I think, more comfortable, getting used to playing with Trae Young a little bit more. I would like to see, we're not necessarily talking about Trae, but I would like to see both of them move off the ball more. I think that's a thing that they both could benefit from in terms of their offensive game. If both of them, Trae and DeJounte, move off the ball more when either of them has the ball in their hands. And if you ask me, outside of Jaylen Brown, on this list, he's the best defender on this list. It kind of can be a toss-up between Jaylen Brown and DeJounte Murray. I think most people give the edge to Jaylen Brown just because of the size difference and the versatility of being able to guard bigger people, bigger bodies in different positions. But DeJounte Murray, phenomenal defender as well. So he's number 8 for me. At number 7, this one felt weird to put this guy this low, considering historically when people make top 10 shooting guard lists, he's like usually top 4 over the last for the last 5-6 years, the prime of his career, if you will. But he's getting a little bit older, getting a little bit slower, coming off of a couple of injuries, but he's still phenomenal, and that's Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is the number 7 for me. I talked about Klay a lot this year. I talked about some of his shot selection at some points. I talked about his mid-range shot selection at some points that I wasn't in love with his shot selection. I think a lot of people weren't in love with Klay's shot selection. That's no surprise there. But Klay Thompson's still one of the best shooters in the league. He led the league in three-pointers made this season. He shot 41% on 10 attempts a game this season. And while he's not as good defensively as he has been in the past, he's coming off of that ACL injury. He's coming off of being just 33 years old. He's going to move a little bit slower. I still wouldn't consider him a bad defender. He's just not the ball stopper that he once was. His instincts are still there. I'm very excited. I'm curious to see what next year looks like for him in terms of the defensive side of the ball. I know technically he'll be a year older, but another year removed from that injury, the confidence might just be back a little bit, and he might be willing to. I'm going to say he might be willing to put in a little more effort defensively, but I don't mean that in the sense that he wasn't putting effort in this year. I just think another year removed from the surgery and a year removed from injury, he might just have some more mental confidence to be able to try to defend like he used to more. That's all I mean by that. No disrespect. I'm not saying he was a bad defender this year. He just wasn't what we have known him to be, because what we've known Klay to be is all defensive caliber defender. He wasn't that this season, but he was still an amazing shooter for them this season. Sleazy, I'm not mad at you counting SGA as a point guard. I know a lot of people do. I think some of the positions, and it's going to get real muddy when we get through the small forward and power forward rankings over the next 2 weeks. It's going to get real muddy there, because some of these guys, as we move closer and closer to what we've been calling over the last couple of seasons a positionless basketball, positionless NBA. Some people call SGA a point. Some people call SGA a shooting guard. Some people, like guys like DeMar DeRozan last year on my list, was real controversial. Some people had him on a small forward list. Some people had him on a power forward list. I like to go by just looking at lineups and seeing who guys played with, like, the most minutes that the lineups those teams run, and just kind of base it off of that. and watching this team play and seeing how they operate, personally, I just got him at the 2. But if you got him at the 1, I'm not mad at that. I've seen people's lists with him at the 1. I've seen people's lists with him at the 2. It just kind of depends on what you're looking at when you classify it. You know what I mean? We just did Clay at 7. So that brings me up to 6. And interestingly enough, what I was talking about earlier, well, I'll save that for a second. That brings me to 6. And at 6 is where I have Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine, to me, he's one of my favorite guys on this list, but he's one of the guys I'm most frustrated with on this list. And I've been frustrated with him most of his career. Zach LaVine is a bucket getter. Zach LaVine is low-key a really solid shooter. I think his shooting ability Zach's shooting ability goes a little, I don't want to use the word underrated, but it's overlooked because we talk about his ability to dunk and stuff like that, and his ability to just be a high flyer, get to the rim. Like, that's what we know Zach for. He's really polished his game out a lot. Zach's a really good shot creator in the mid-range game. 3-point shot is really good. His ability to create for himself is why Black Majestic, to your point, his ability to create for himself is why I have him over Klay Thompson. I think Zach had a really, really good season this year. I just wish he was better defensively. The only knock I have on Zach LaVine, other than potentially scoring more and be doing that at a more efficient level to get him higher on his list or whatever, or dabbling more into playmaking, but because he has the strength, the athleticism, the speed, I personally wish he was a better defender, but I'm a guy who likes defense. So Zach LaVine at 6 for me. Yeah, Sleazy. Yeah, personally, I have him over Clay. Same. Zach LaVine's shot creation, I think, is, I don't want to use the word underrated. I just don't think it's talked about that much. Like, I think people know he can do it when you watch a Bulls game. The problem is who's watching a Bulls game. So, you know, when you tune into a Bulls game, you're going to see some really, really good shot making from Zach LaVine. DeMar DeRozan too, obviously, but Zach LaVine's a really good shot creator. Moving on to number 5, and this is where it gets a little muddy and interesting getting into this top 5 here. This is where I actually have Anthony. Oh, excuse me. At number 5 is actually where I have Anthony Edwards. Now, Anthony Edwards, he's like, I struggle with ranking young players. I'm gonna keep it a bean. I do. I'm one of those guys who I really like to see how a player does for a couple of years. Sleazy, I agree. Honestly, Zach LaVine had one of the most underrated seasons from the guard last year. I'm not mad. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But in Anthony Edwards' case, I struggle with ranking young players. Anthony Edwards is in his 3rd year, I believe. He's his 1st year being an all-star. Third year, 1st year being an all-star, 24 points a game this season. And part of the reason I think I struggle with ranking young players is because young players get a lot of hype, and sometimes I feel like I let the public's hype cloud my judgment of these young players. So I'm really looking forward to watching the Timberwolves this year, and I think we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. There are some teams that I realize I have, like teams and players that I think I realize I have an inherent bias either for or against. And this season, I'm going to do a real concerted effort to try to watch them a lot to see if, even if it's a positive bias or negative bias, to see if it's valid. Like, I'm just curious if it's valid. And Anthony Edwards is one of the players who, I'll admit, going into this season, I had a negative bias against. A lot of people at the end of last season was like, yo, Anthony Edwards is going to be a superstar this year. He's going to be best shooting guard in the league next year. Like, there was a lot of hype surrounding Anthony Edwards coming into this season. I'm talking last summer. Into this season, there was a lot of hype. He proved the hype was valid. He proved the hype was valid. Anthony Edwards had a really, really good season. Carried that Timberwolves team through a lot. Mind you, they did end up making the playoffs, but Karl-Anthony Towns only plays 29 games. They ended up trading away. He has to get used to playing with Rudy Gobert, a whole different 2 big man system. Only for those 29 games, then for Cat to be injured. They trade D'Lo midway through the season. Now he's got to get used to playing with a new point guard, Mike Conley. And through all of these not turmoil, but just change in the roster, change in play style, change in just what he had to go through in terms of just a basketball player on the court, he stayed consistent. The shooting was good, attacking the basket was good, shot creation was good. He's going to be a really, really good player. And this season made me an Ant-Man believer. I ain't gonna hold you. This season made me an Ant-Man believer. And Sleazy, I agree. It's hard ranking the guy you know has a super high ceiling. Part of my inherent bias against him was I wasn't sure how high his ceiling was going into this season. And people were telling me his ceiling was high. But now I see it. I can admit, I see it. And I'm happy with his game. At number 4, pull up my list. Let me pull up my list. At number 4 is where I have Jaylen Brown. I think Jaylen Brown had a really, really good season. Honestly, I think Jaylen Brown had the best season of his career. He was a second time in his career. He made an all-star team. No, I'm sorry. Am I right there? Am I wrong there? Where did I write that down? Jaylen Brown. Here we go. Yeah. Second time in his career, he made an all-star team. Career high in points this season. He just did a lot. I ain't gonna lie, he lost me. I think he had a really, really good year. I really do. The two-way play was phenomenal. I think offensively he was really, really good. I think a lot of people are going to, how can I put this? I think a lot of people are going to harp on and knock Jaylen Brown for his playoff performances, for his playoff performance. I think Jaylen Brown took a lot of slander from that this summer. His playoff performance isn't why I have him at 4, though. I think he was really good offensively. I think he was really good defensively. I think Jaylen Brown also benefits from being a part of a really, really well-orchestrated team. Personally, I'm not holding this against him, but I think Jaylen Brown benefits from playing alongside Jason Tatum. The rest of these guys on this list, in my opinion, they are the number one. They are the defense's number one focal point. I think Jaylen Brown benefits from being the defensive second focal point, and personally, I think he's at 4. I would love to see, I'm not saying I want to see them break up. A lot of people say they would love to see what Jaylen Brown looks like on his own team. I would love to see it too. Maybe I'll simulate it in 2K, because in the same breath, I don't want him and Jason Tatum to break up, because I think they were an excellent duo that really works well together, really plays well together. I think their strengths kind of balance each other out. They're both good defensively, good two-way wings that just make the Celtics a really, really good team. And I don't think him being at 4 is disrespect. I don't. Yeah, and we do know that JT has those nasty shooting numbers, Sleazy, to your point. And JB got to be number 1. But I think, to play devil's advocate here with you, some of those nights where Jason Tatum is having a horrible shooting night is because he's getting the number 1 defensive attention. And so the defensive scheme might be working that night on Jason Tatum, and that might be why he's having a bad night. But so much of that defensive scheme is focused on Jason Tatum that Jaylen Brown can get off, because it's not the primary defender guarding him. And not a ton of teams have 2 elite perimeter defenders. You know what I'm saying? So it really ain't no knock to JB in my mind. Like, I love his game. And I know plenty of people who have the conversation on any given night, Jaylen Brown is better than Jason Tatum. I'm always here for that conversation. Like, people have that conversation all the time, whatever. But for me and how I view it, he's number 4. And you know what I mean? It's close, but he's just number 4. At number 3, though, is where I have Donovan Mitchell. And this is where I struggled with this top 3. I'm not going to hold you. I ain't struggling much with Jaylen Brown. I knew he was going to be 4. I don't mean in a disrespectful way. How I look at it, I knew he was going to be my 4. These top 3 of Devin Booker, SGA, and Donovan Mitchell was a struggle for me for a couple of reasons. Donovan Mitchell, I have at 3. And as weird as it sounds, not because I think it ain't because I don't think he can do anything that Devin Booker does. And you might be wondering, well, why don't I ain't mentioned SGA? I think Devin Booker and Donovan Mitchell, when it comes to the shooting guard position for most of this season, for me, they were 1 and 2. Like, almost all season long, they were like a 1A, 1B situation, 1A, 1B situation. I think they can do a lot of very similar things, all 3 of those guys, to an extent. But SGA is a little different, and I'll explain why in a second. Just comparing Donovan Mitchell and Devin Booker here. When it comes to Booker and Mitchell, I think they're very similar. They both can shoot the ball well. They both can operate in the mid-range. They both can get to the basket. They both have experience being number 1 options on their teams. Big moments in the playoffs. Not the only, but the main edge I think that I would give over Devin Booker over Donovan Mitchell is the ability to make tougher shots. And it's not necessarily, for me at least, it's not necessarily a skill difference or a skill gap, things like that. Don't get me wrong, because I've seen Donovan Mitchell stick some really tough shots. Like, we saw him drop 71 this year, let's be real. Devin Booker's just a little taller. And I think some of that height difference allows him to shoot over either similar sized defenders or smaller defenders. Donovan Mitchell's size difference, I think, holds him back slightly, and that's why I have him at the 3. But in that same breath, that size difference is what made me want to rank him a little higher. Because in my mind, he does... Oh, lag was really bad? My fault. In my mind, I think Donovan Mitchell can do anything Devin Booker can do. He's just a little smaller than him. So that's why I got him at. I'm not mad at you saying Jaylen Brown's better than him. D Booker's so far ahead of D Mitch in my eyes. See, I don't see that. I know a lot of people will say that, but the reason I don't see it is because to me at least, they all can score at the same level. They all get the same amount of defensive pressure. I think if anything, defensively, neither of them is doing anything. Like, if we keep it a bean, for me at least, neither of them is doing nothing crazy defensively. Honestly, I might say Donovan Mitchell is a slightly better defender than Devin Booker. That's just off of energy and effort. Not saying Booker doesn't give energy and effort on the defensive side of the ball. I just think I've seen Donovan Mitchell give more and be a better defender. He's just smaller. I think and it's not a hold back thing. I don't think there's that big of a gap between Donovan Mitchell and Devin Booker. And I realize I'm in a big minority here. Like, most people won't agree with me there. And I'll explain when we get to where Devin Booker is, I'll explain what gave me the nod, what did give him the nod over Donovan Mitchell. But I just really wanted to show Donovan Mitchell some love, because I think the discourse that I see on the internet is a lot of people don't think Donovan Mitchell is as good as I think he is, which is cool. Like, it's cool with me. I think he's I think he's a really, really good shooting guard. And I'm gonna keep it a bean. If SGA wasn't on my list as a shooting guard, because I realized I already put him as a shooting guard when I was going through ranking, like not going through ranking, but kind of putting players in pools, Donovan Mitchell would be number 2 on my list. So I'm not mad at that. At number 2, though, is where I have SGA. I think SGA had a phenomenal season. He was top 10 in clutch scoring, all NBA first team. What he did for that Thunder team, I'm not saying this Thunder team don't got talent. Like, I like a lot of the guys from this Thunder team, but that Thunder team ain't doing what it did this season without SGA. It's just simply not. And that alone is kind of what makes me put him here. I went back and forth between 2 and the 3 spot for Donovan Mitchell and SGA. Ultimately ended up putting SGA at the 2. A couple of things I would like to see more from SGA. If he could become a better shooter, bro, the sky's the limit for his game. The sky's already the limit for his game, but if he could become a better shooter, averaging 30 on only taking 2 threes a game on some not good shooting percentages is crazy. Averaging 30 on almost all 2s is crazy. So shout out to SGA. I think he had a really, really good season. I think and that's the part of the sleazy. This is why I like doing ranking, because I think a lot of us we just all have different things we prioritize. And I'm not mad at that. And at number 1 is where I have Devin Booker. And I'm going to tell you the difference between Devin Booker and Donovan Mitchell. Once again, skipping over the SGA part. The difference I have between Devin Booker and Donovan Mitchell and why Devin Booker is 1 is very similar to, that's why I brought it up in the beginning, to the, why is his name slipping my mind? Nuggets point guard. My brain wants to say Jalen Brunson. I know it ain't Jalen Brunson. Why am I just drawing a blank? Basically, Devin Booker's playoff play was so good and so phenomenal that his ability to still look like the number 1 option. Yeah, Jamal Murray. Thank you. I knew you was going to tell me eventually. Somebody was going to tell me. Sometimes my brain just turned off and I can't remember guys' names. You casual. One of the main reason, obviously, yes, Devin Booker had a phenomenal season. Scores at all levels of the court. Clutch shot after clutch shot. Like, his mid-range game is absolutely phenomenal. But the reason I have him number 1 is for his playoff play. Very similar to why I ranked Jamal Murray where I ranked him. He would already have been in the mix of the top 3. Like, I ain't gonna front. He was already in top 3 mix off by default. But what he did in the playoffs, the way he elevated his game in the playoffs, still playing alongside Kevin Durant, but still looking like the number 1 guy. And going into this season, I think it's clear that he's going to be the number 1 guy for the Suns. I think he had a phenomenal year. I really, really do. So before we move on to the rest of this stuff that we got on the docket for today, my top 10 shooting guard list is Devin Booker, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Donovan Mitchell, Jaylen Brown, Anthony Edwards, Zach LaVine, Klay Thompson, DeJounte Murray, Bradley Beal, and Tyrese Maxey. I'm not mad at the list, clearly. Sleazy, I get it, though. You ain't mad at the list, but you don't love it, and I get that. You ain't going to love every list. I know some people ain't going to hate the Jaylen Brown picking being that high. Jaylen Brown pick might be the only pick that I think people are going to have some controversy with. And I'm not tripping over that. Like I said, if you wanted Desmond Bane or Tyler Hero in there over either Beal or Maxey, I'm not tripping over that either. I think Anthony Edwards and Zach LaVine, at least right now, in my opinion, are like solidly 5'6". Some people might want Klay a little bit higher because of his legacy and his reputation. He ain't have a bad year. He had a good season. To me, Klay Thompson fell into and this is going to sound, some people might take this as disrespectful. I don't mean it this way, but what Klay Thompson did this year reminded me a lot of like a prime Kyle Korver. He was out there to let it fly. The defense wasn't there like it used to be. The shot creation wasn't there like it used to be. But you know what was there? His ability to run around screens and let it fly. So shout out to these guys. Like, I think he had a good year, though. I do. All right. Moving on to a couple of things. So let's talk about Team USA real quick. I'll be honest, more so from not so much as a breaking down the game part, just I have some thoughts. So I'm going to share them. I don't know how to explain it, but I have some thoughts I want to share.